right, good morning. We are supposed to see nobody's immune. Nobody is immune to sin. Nobody is immune to being drugged down, drug away. Even those who come from famous spiritual families who should, quote, know better, they got caught up in these same ugly attitudes, fallen, broken practices of the day. And I think we are to see as well that at least there's one character, the way I read our story, there is at least one character, like these early settlers of Georgia. He has a choice before him. We will read it. We'll see it, I think. He has a choice before him to make a fresh start, to get on the right path, a choice that we all have in this life, a choice that is at the core of Jesus' story. So we are in the book of Judges, towards the end, chapter 18. Joanne is going to come up and read our passage for us today. She'll read the first 20 verses, but we will make it through the whole of Judges 18 by the end of our time together. I think our chapter here starts out sort of like a wedding. In a wedding, you have something old and something new. I might even make a case today that there's something borrowed, at least it's taken, and there's something blue, kind of the attitudes of these people. The old thing that is here, it's a repeated theme. Verse 1, in those days there was no king in Israel. This tells us several things. One, it tells us for sure that this picture, it's a picture of looking back. Someone who wrote this is looking back to things back in the day, and they're saying, back in those days, there was no king in Israel. Meaning in part, they didn't have a king, they didn't have a leader, they didn't have a godly leader who was helping them walk in the right ways, walk in God's ways, and because they didn't, all this stuff happened, bad stuff happened. They're looking back in part and saying, here's where it all started, back here. And they're telling this story. And then I think, we are also to see how this is repeated. We saw it twice last week. We saw it this week as well. They are connecting these times that are jacked up and messed up. They're connecting them with the fact that they didn't have a king back in the day. And the person who's writing it obviously is saying, like we do in our day. We have a godly king. Likely written, at least part of this was written in the times of David, maybe Solomon. So that's the old thing. The new thing that we see is a new set of characters. The tribe of Dan, or sometimes called the Danites. And we see a new storyline here. We not only see where they are settling in the land and how that came about and where they were going, but how they did it. And I think this is key, how they did it. What exactly were their attitudes as they were beginning to find this spot for themselves to settle? The attitudes and in the ugly origins, I'm calling it, I think they have far-reaching effects, as we'll see by the end of our time. And we see this story of the Danites, this new tribe, kind of woven into the story of Micah and the Levite from last week. And then I think a thing that we are clearly seeing in what Joanne read for us, there's now this theme woven into this whole story, connecting with what we read last week, a theme of taking, things being taken. You notice it first in verse 17, the 5 men who had gone to scout out the land, they went up and they entered and they took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, the metal image, while the priests stood by. We see it several times here in this chapter. You see it down in verse 20 as well, sort of connecting their choices with also the priest himself, this young Levite. And the priest's heart was glad when they said, come with us. And he himself took the ephod and the household gods and the carved image, and he went along with the people. So the text is in effect saying all these people were just taking this stuff and leaving. They were escaping. This is ironic because this same attitude of taking, this problematic in some sense in our story today, it definitely was problematic that we saw last week. If you remember last week, the way all of this whole story started was Micah, the guy who made this carved image, the guy who had all this ephod and household gods, he had taken silver from his mom. Do you remember that? The whole chapter last week started. He took this silver from his mom, and then she was so happy that she got it back, she had this idol made. So in a sense, this is like divine justice, in a sense. Micah getting what's coming to him because he had taken from his mom. In another sense, I think it underscores a theme that is in our passage today. What Micah was doing to his mom, he didn't want to have done to him. Very much the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Micah was not doing how he wanted to be done to his mom, and it came back to haunt him. But I think this theme of taking the idols, taking the metal image, I think it colors, I think it frames, it explains, in a sense, how we are to understand the Danites settling, colonizing, where they would eventually land in the far north. It says, the beginning of our text, it says this is a story about that. In those days, the tribe of the people of Dan were seeking for themselves an inheritance to dwell in, for until that time no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So this is a story about that. And then they make some choices here, how to do that. This is their origins story, and I think we are to see in how they come to these people living up north and the type of people that they are and how the Danites treated them. They're taking this land from them. Verse 7 sort of gives us a hint of this. The Danites, they saw the people who were there, how they lived in security after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet. They were quiet people. Quiet and unsuspecting, lacking nothing that is in the earth, possessing wealth, and how they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. You see it later on, which we're going to read this section a little bit later too, but verse 27, the people of Dan took what Micah had made. They took the priest who belonged to him. They came to Laish, to that people, a quiet people, unsuspecting people. They struck them with the edge of the sword. They burned the city with fire, and there was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. Now, it describes these type of people. It describes what Dan did to them. It describes how it followed on the taking of this metal image, this idol. But it doesn't make a lot of explanation. The Bible doesn't tell us, oh, and this is how you're to view that. But I think, as we read this in context, what we are to pick up on the fact here, and we'll read it more in just a little bit, in the Danites dealing with Micah when he comes to ask him about, why'd you take my idol? These guys are bullies. That's how we are to view them. They bullied the young Levite into coming with them. We'll read in a moment how they bullied Micah. And I think we're to view them as they came up to the north and they bullied the Laishans, the people who were settled in this far country. I think that's part of the point here as we get down to the end of Judges and we have this picture of this tribe and how they're living and what they're doing. It's meant to show that this tribe and this people, their attitude was off. And it made their focus off. Like they were fighting the wrong battles. Multiple commentators come back, read this, and they say, you know, they came to this people, they came to this tribe up north, and they took the easy way out. They came upon these people. Maybe they were far off on the edges of where they should have been colonizing. Way back in the day, Joshua, from the previous book in the Bible, he gave these lands to these different people. Each tribe had their spot. The Danites had their spot, but there were strong people in their spot and there were weak people in their spot. And they chose to focus on these weak people. We read in Judges chapter 1, verse 34. We had read this weeks and weeks ago. It says the Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for the Amorites did not allow the people of Dan to come down into the plain. The Amorites persisted in dwelling in Mount Heres and Ajalon and Shalabim. But then it says, but the hand of the house of Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor. So you got two different tribes here, the Danites and another tribe, what's called the half-tribe of Manasseh, but the half-tribe of Manasseh came from Joseph, and they lived close together. So what the Bible is showing here back in Judges chapter 1, it's showing that the half-tribe of Manasseh was strong, and they fought hard battles, but the tribe of Dan, they fought the easy battles. They didn't do the hard stuff. They didn't take risks. They didn't trust God. God, we're coming up here, we're trying to make a way for ourselves, but these battles are hard. They took the easy way out. Many commentators look at this and they make connections to things that happened way back in the day in Judges chapter 18, and you get all the way to the end of the Bible. the book of Revelation, and they note things about the tribe of Dan. The book of Revelation, chapter 7, inspired with the Holy Spirit, Apostle John writes, after this, in this great revelation vision, he says, after this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel descending from the rising sun with the seal of the living God, and he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed ones, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And it lists those who were sealed, and it lists those who were of the tribes of Israel. 12,000 from the tribe of Judah, 12,000 from the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 from the tribe of Gad, 12,000 from the tribe of Asher, 12,000 from the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 from the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 from the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 from the tribe of Levi, 12,000 from the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 from the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 from the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 from the tribe of Benjamin. All those 12,000s are 12. If you multiply them all out, you get 144,000. I'm not reading that to go in some end times theology. When I'm reading this to point out, and I'm not going to read it again, you could read it again, you won't see the tribe of Dan in there anywhere. Tribe of Dan is not listed. You get down to the Bible and say, here's all the tribes. Where's Dan? Biblical commentators hold this out, and in part they say, could it have been because of the idolatry that Dan was living in? The idolatry that Dan started in their very lands. I don't think that's the best explanation, because as you read this, who is replacing the tribe of Dan is the tribe of Manasseh. The tribe of Manasseh and the tribe of Dan, as I mentioned a while ago, they lived close to each other. They're basically saying Manasseh was bigger, Manasseh was stronger. I think Manasseh was fighting the battles that they were supposed to be fighting. Manasseh had the right attitude, and they're not included in Dan shunned just for the idolatry, but the idolatry led to their focus being off. Their attitudes led to their idolatry. Their attitudes led to their idolatry, led to their focus being off. They didn't fight the very battles that they were supposed to fight, and so you get down to the end, Manasseh was doing what they were supposed to be doing, so they were included because they had more space. They had more land. That's how I view it. I think their attitudes, these ugly origins, had far-reaching effects. So let's see what happened next. This next paragraph in our ugly origin story, to my mind, the only hopeful section in the whole of this chapter. Judges chapter 18, verse 21. So, these folks, they turned and departed, putting their little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. I think that's telling, even of itself, just this verse 21. They put the weakest people in the front. We're going to fight a battle. Let's put our weakest folks in the front. That tells you some things about Dan. When they had gone a distance from the home of Micah, the men, the neighbors who were in the house near Micah's house, were called out. They overtook the people of Dan, and they shouted to the people of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What is the matter with you that you come with such a company?" And he said, "You take my gods that I made and the priest, and you go away, and what have I left? How then do you ask me, what is the matter with you?" The people of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household." Then the people of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. I think in this section here, we continue to see the character of the Danites revealed as a tribe of bullies. But I think in the person of Micah, right here in this section, he's the only hopeful character in the whole story. He's the bad guy from last week. And not only does he get what's coming to him, in a sense, justice, but in my mind, he's the only one who has any hope by the end of our story. I'll explain that in a second. It starts, though, with Micah's discretion. He chose not to push the matter. We say sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, meaning that it's better sometimes to be careful and not to do something dangerous or unnecessary because it will be pointless. He chose not to fight them because they were way too strong for him. Micah recognized that these Danites were bullies, and they were much stronger bullies. So sometimes when we find ourselves in these sort of no-win situations, the best thing we can do is just trust ourselves to God's sovereignty. And I think in my mind, if Micah we're not told how he left here, what his mindset was, but if he had entrusted himself to God's sovereignty, he would have come out the best for everyone. But notice first his comment here, verse 24. It's almost comical. I think this is how we're meant to see it, sort of comically ironic. Verse 24, he says, "You take my gods that I made and the priest, and you go away, and what have I left? How then do you ask me what's the matter with you?" Micah's complaint here, it reveals the ridiculous nature of his actions last week that we read. One, Micah says, "You took my gods that I made." That's like oxymoronic. It's like two things that don't go together. God that is made. It's oxymoronic. Like they can't both be true, can they? Yet they're in the same sentence. It's sort of like saying military intelligence. They don't go together. It's oxymoronic. If Micah had made a god, then it's really no god at all. Gods that are made are not, by definition, gods. The ridiculous complaint here is meant to show not only the ridiculousness of Micah's actions back in the day, but I think finding this statement as we do here at the end of Judges, we're meant to see how it colors all of the whole of Judges, and really, as we'll see in a moment, these ugly attitudes, the origins of them, colored all of the Israelites' history. There's chapters in the Bible. Isaiah has a key one. I think it's chapter 40, where Isaiah says those things that are made out of wood or metal, they can't be gods at all. It's foolishness. You make a drinking cup out of one and you bow down to the other one. You burn some in the fire to keep warm and you make an idol out of it. It doesn't make sense. But two, Micah cries out, "You do this, you take my things, and what do I have left? You took my idols, you took my fake priests, you took my counterfeit ephod. What do I have left then?" It's almost comical. It's so narrow-minded and blinded to the truth. The truth is, these guys did Micah a huge favor. He was following false gods. He was following false religion, fake religion, messed up religion, broken religion. He was doing things all the wrong way, and they took all of that from him. And then he finds himself with nothing, and I think God is like hinting strongly to Micah, "I've got you right where I want you now, if you would pay attention. Turn back to me." If Micah would recognize it, it's not that he had nothing. He had everything he needed because he had opportunity to connect with the invisible God. God Almighty, who says, worship me with no trappings, no means. There's nothing you have to do to connect with me. It is only through faith. There's no works you have to do. There's no actions. Just come to me in faith and you will be completely accepted. It's just a real relationship with just me and just you. Micah, to my mind, is the only hopeful character in the whole story, or at least he has the potential to be hopeful. For Micah went back. He gave up. He walked away from these bullies, and he went back to an empty house. And the question that I think that is left lingering for Micah is, what will he do next? What will he choose to do next? Will he turn back like a dog to the vomit that he was wallowing in, or will he do faith better? It's very much like a literal picture of Jesus' words from Luke chapter 11. Jesus said, "When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through like waterless places, seeking rest. And finding none, it says, 'I will return to the house from which I came.' And when the unclean spirit comes, it finds the house swept and put in order. Then it goes and it brings 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person then is worse than the first." Jesus saying, when you have gotten free from an unclean spirit, be careful what you then fill your house with. You're going to worship something in this life. Worship Jesus Christ. Fill your home with His Spirit, and all will be well. Your attitudes will be well. Your origins will have great beginnings. You will be building your house on the rock, and all will be right. All right, let's see how our origin story concludes. And I will say it concludes with one of the most surprising endings of the Bible, at least for people back in the day, the way they would have read it. This was one of the most surprising things in all the Bible. Verse 27. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made, and the priest who belonged to him, and they came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and they struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire, and there was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob. Then they rebuilt the city, and they lived in it, and they named the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their ancestor, who was born to Israel way back in the day. But the name of the city was Laish at the first. And the people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. This was a big surprise ending. It was like a big reveal at the end. We see now who this young Levite was all along. If you remember last week, he was just a Levite. This week, at the first of our story, he was the young Levite. He was anonymous until now, and we didn't have his name, and it was a big-time name recognition. He was none other than the grandson of Moses. That would not only have been a huge surprise to people first hearing it or first reading it back in the day, it would have been a huge scandal. They would have thought, this was Moses' grandson? Are you kidding me? We can see, you can actually see, if you have your Bible with you today, I hope you do, you can see evidence of how scandalous it was. Most people's Bible, if you open it up, electronic or physical, will have a note. In my Bible, it's the letter C, because in the previous chapter, there was also a note A and B, but here you get down to the name of Moses. There's a little note C. You follow down to the end, and it says, or, like you follow the note in the description, the explanation, it says, or Manasseh. Like it could be Moses or it could be Manasseh. That's because in the Hebrew text back in the day, it was so scandalous to say that this was Moses' grandson that some scholar, some writer, some copier of the Bible struck out the name of Moses. It's still there, but they struck it out and they put Manasseh in the top, written above it, so that it would tell people who were reading these texts in the synagogues back in the day, when you get to that spot, don't say Moses, because that disrespects Moses. Just say Manasseh, and we'll all know what it means. We know who it was, but let's just say Manasseh to be nice. That's how scandalous it was. They changed the Bible in order not to say that it was Moses. This whole story is a scandalous, ugly origins story. It's looking back in the day and holding up a window to the past to say, see, here's where it all began. And these are actually the people who did that. Not with unsuspecting people that the Danites had displaced and kicked out, but the Danites themselves. Micah, the young Levite, Jonathan, we learn his name now. He's the young Levite, Jonathan, Moses' grandson. In the end, they themselves are the unsuspecting people. They don't even know what they're doing. They don't know how far-reaching their actions actually are. That's what we are supposed to get out of this story. You see it three different ways. You get down to the end, verse 31, and it says, so they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. So someone was writing it back in the day and saying that false image, they put it way up north in Dan, and it stayed there as long as the tabernacle, the house of God, was at this city called Shiloh. And you can read about it. The Bible says, I think it's 1 Samuel chapter 17 perhaps, it describes how long the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle was at Shiloh, and then it wasn't. So it was at least here this long. But then a second thing that we see here, verse 30, not only do we learn the name of this young Levite, he's Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses. It says his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. Most biblical scholars say that was probably, especially that last phrase, until the day of the captivity of the land, probably that last phrase right there was written in after the fact. Because the day of the captivity of the land was when the northern kingdom, many hundreds of years later, Israel will be torn apart into a southern kingdom, Judah, a northern kingdom, all the rest of Israel. But after hundreds of years, people had gotten so far away from God, there was so much idolatry, God allowed the Assyrian army to swoop in, defeat the northern kingdom, and take all of these people captive. They carried them captive off to Assyria, and somebody went back and wrote that this idol, this false religion, this fake religion initially started, here's where it all started, these ugly origins from Moses' grandson. It lasted all the way until the captivity of the land. That's like hundreds and hundreds of years. They're looking back and saying, here's where it all started. But one final thing, most scholars look back and they say, there is yet another reason that's not as obvious here, especially not when you read this text, but there's another more, especially for Israelites back in the day, they would have said there's an even more significant text that connects directly with what these Danites were doing. Many hundreds of years later, 1 Kings chapter 12 was written. 1 Kings chapter 12 describes how those two kingdoms were torn apart. Rehoboam, son of Solomon, had the southern kingdom. Jeroboam, who started the northern kingdom, he led all these other tribes in rebellion against Solomon's son. And not only did he lead them in rebellion against the king, rebellion against the kingdom, he said, you know what? Don't even go to Jerusalem anymore and worship God in that temple. Let me set you up some other places that you can, quote, worship God. 1 Kings chapter 12, then Jeroboam, he built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. That's sort of in the central part. For him, it would have been the southern part of his land, his northern kingdom. And he went out from there and he built Peniel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. And so Jeroboam, the king, took counsel, and he made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Then this thing became a sin, for the people would go as far as Dan in the north to bow down, to be before one of those idols. Biblical scholars highlight and say there is a connection to what happened in Dan back in the day with Jonathan, the grandson of Moses, and what Jeroboam was doing. Very likely Jeroboam put his idol in the northern country, in Dan, because he knew it would find a place there. It would be accepted. The lie would be accepted because it had a history of a lie up there. It had a history of a fake religion. It had a history of a people who weren't following God faithfully, and so it would be very easy to lead them astray. And this whole chapter 18, connected to chapter 17, is warning us. It's like a picture in the past. Be careful of the little homemade, the little personal sins that you think are okay. Be careful with what you allow to fester. Be careful with what you allow to start in your heart. Don't allow roots of bitterness to grow and defile many people. Be careful what sins you nurture, because you never know what far-reaching effects they could have. Let me pray.